Herzlich willkommen zu Unzensiert, der Talkreihe auf dem Filmfest, die von der Zeitstiftung unterstützt wird, bei der ich mich täglich mit Regisseuren aus der ganzen Welt treffe und mit denen darüber spreche, wie es ist, Filme zu machen in Zeiten der Krise. Und Lidija Zelović, die heute bei mir ist, war nicht nur als Filmemacherin in verschiedenen Krisen unterwegs und hat persönliche Krisen durchgemacht, über die wir gleich sprechen werden, sondern sie hat als Journalistin in den Kriegsgebieten dieser Welt viele Jahre verbracht. Auch damit sprechen wir jetzt. Lidija, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me here.
You have, I just said it in German, you've worked as a journalist in multiple conflict zones, in Kosovo, in Afghanistan, and so on. But then suddenly you stopped working as a journalist. Why?
I think a better question is why I started,
Well, tell me why you started then.
I didn't mean better question, sorry. No, I think more appropriate in my case. You kind of get... I came out of the war myself, and at the time I didn't think that was the reason why I started. I was... You know, you've got these very arbitrary moments in a life. I was doing traineeship in England, and a very handsome director asked me to accompany him in Kosovo for a film, to be his assistant. And then when we were there, the war started. Before you know, you kind of end up being... So I kind of thought man was very handsome, and I went places, you know. And then, but now when I think about it, of course, I did stay in a war zone for longer because I was attracted to it. I was attracted to this idea of a death or a life, or a love and hate, black and white. And nothing can compare to that. You know, you'll go back to live a normal life, and it feels like, what now?
Is it an adrenaline rush, or what is it?
It became adrenaline rush. It started as a very high moral issue of I'm going to tell to the world what's going on. I really did think that at the time when I started. I was thinking like, I'm in a very important place, and I'm the one who's gonna tell the world what the situation is like. In the course of time, you slowly learn it's not the case. You're just part of a problem rather than part of a solution. But by then, it became adrenaline problem. It became adrenaline rush and addicted.
What do you mean you're part of a problem? Are journalists general in conflict zones part of the problem?
Yeah, that maybe sounds very general. What I meant, yes, but what I meant is it has to do with the fact that you go there, as many journalists go there with the idea, I'm going to tell to the world what is it like. But no, you're telling to the world what the bad things are like. You never tell about the good things because that doesn't sell the news. It's not part of what the news is like, you know. And before you figure out, you are feeding the enemy, you know, feeding the bad instead of feeding the good, and feeding the very cheap and superficial and low feelings, you know. And then in opposite on that side, opposite of that is the documentary film, which I believe in my eyes is the chance of feeding the deep and important and valuable. Of course, it's not for the masses, because news is for the masses. It's very simple, and you make it very simple, you make it very understandable, very low threshold.
But isn't that important also to sort of shed light on conflicts and get the masses to pay attention to that?
That is the part of a problem. Of course it's very important. Of course it's very important to do that, but it's kind of got out of hand in my eyes. In my eyes, it's kind of gotten out of hand. Now we just focus on the bad things. And within a conflict, we don't focus on the positive things within a conflict. We only focus on what's wrong with the people there. What bad are they doing to each other? How much they hate each other. Though there's many moments, I remember while working as a journalist, that there was that moments when there is something positive going on, and no one is interested in that story. No one wants to take the story of positive thing in a war, because it somehow doesn't sell or makes it even more confusing. Or how do you mean now Serbs and Croats doing something together? It's like, you know, let's keep that, you know, it's like that doesn't, it makes them just confused. Like, you know, what is that?
Did you see that already while you were a journalist in conflict zones, and did you try to sell positive stories?
Yes, I really have. I've seen many positive moments in Kosovo and in Palestine, in Israel. I've seen many positive things that we tried to get through, which somehow at that moment didn't. At the beginning, it's very funny because at the beginning you talk to the producer and then you try to say like, hey, there is this story going on. Yes, it's a very small story, but it's very good and positive story. It can tell something bigger. That's actually what documentary film is about. It's like, let me tell a small story which is going to tell something, in microcosmos, tell something in micro. But it doesn't sell. And news goes like, the producer goes like, but that doesn't sell. It's just, what kind of tiny, unimportant story there is. What is important, how many people got killed, how they got killed, These are just facts. And then
Facts that you as a journalist also, of course, shape, and you shape a narrative of a conflict, just as you do as a documentary filmmaker. So what is the key difference between the two?
You're completely right. You're actually doing exactly the same, except that in news you don't have a freedom of having your own opinion. It's all meant to be, it's a fact, and it's a simple facts of what is going on. And it is your point of view, but it is from a certain angle. And the angle is not yours. It's from the news you work in, the agency you're working for. The documentary film, you have that freedom that it is, again, your own point of view, but it's very much your own point of view. And that's what documentary film is for. That's a kind of frame in which you have a chance to translate your opinion or your feeling about.
I agree to a certain extent, but you're still financially dependent on organizations, on TV stations. So in that sense, you still have to compromise your own vision, your own view, right?
I'm very lucky, and I'm talking from absolutely luxury point of view, that I live in Holland and that I'm working always for the same TV, Icon TV, Dutch, who kind of buy my ideas. They can trust me, and we are very much aware of the fact that I'm making films for a very small audience. Documentary films are generally made for a very small audience, and this is the kind of films that I make that's even within that small audience, for the small audience, within the small audience. So it is a tiny, but okay, you got to start somewhere. I'd rather do that than make for a big audience something that I don't stand behind.
So they give you complete freedom to do whatever you want, basically.
I get really complete freedom to do what I want, but I have to put on the top of it is that I'm very exotic in Holland. I come from a war, and war sells, and I kind of don't dare tell her anything. She's refugees, kind of pay attention, but you tell her. So and
maybe we have to tell your story a little bit. You fled from Sarajevo when you were
21.
21 when the war broke out there, and since then you've been living in Amsterdam.
Yes.
And right now, before we talked a little bit, and you said living abroad is great, although you've been living in Holland longer than you've been living in Sarajevo. Why do you still feel you're living abroad?
I think that's the general thing for anyone who has left. I think it's even for any kind of immigrant, and definitely for refugees. That's what I say. Once a refugee, always a refugee. There is something there that once you leave a home, something that you've been brought up with, you always compare it to that. The rest of the world stands to comparison to where you brought, and you do it subconsciously, and yet somehow the rest of the world is abroad. But then you come to a certain point where home is abroad as well. So but that's it is. It's got something very positive about that, very freeing, very strong about being a foreigner. And you kind of shape your identity around that as well. So it's not such a bad...
That is a little counterintuitive. Why is it a strong and a positive thing to feel foreign in your home country?
It's especially strong to feel foreign in a new country, because especially if the country is Netherlands and very liberal and free place, which allows you to be yourself and to take the distance and see the world from that point. And when you go back, it's maybe less freeing not to belong to the place where you belong, but it is freeing from a point that at least you can't go back, because that feeling of being able to go back makes you even more restless, because you're kind of constantly thinking, shall I go back or shall I not go back? And you don't want to be busy with that constantly your whole life. You want to, at a certain point, live life.
But then, would you call yourself Dutch to some extent? And if I were to ask you, what's your home or where's your home, what would you say?
I would say I live in Holland. That's really my thing. I live in Holland and I'm Yugoslav. Considering the country doesn't exist anymore, I live in a kind of fairy tale, and that's very freeing. So you live in your own world, which gives you a complete, like, romantic idea of shaping the world to the way you want it to be.
In the film, you go back to a country that now doesn't exist anymore, and you look back at your journey. And at one point, you're saying it was easier to look at reality through a lens. Why so?
It's generally kind of feels protective. It's a responsibility of the camera. It's not your own responsibility. It feels very. I always felt, and sometimes I actually thought I'm making films just kind of to allow myself to experience the world, and I don't dare it always just as much. That somehow when I have a camera, I have an reason and excuse to be there. And otherwise, it's like, what am I doing here? What's the point? And it has been, you do these things, it's before you, somehow war happens to you. War it's not something you plan and you have much control over it. War somehow happens and then you live with it, and then you live through it, and then war finishes. And it's somehow everything should be fine. It's over. It's like, people also ask, like, are you going back? It's like, back? What is back? Who am I? It's like million very existential questions raised. And then war was finished, and I went back to my home, to what was home. And I found it really unbearably exciting. Unbearably, it's like, I didn't know what to do with the feeling. And I was so, that actually the camera allowed me to talk, to express myself, to be there. And it's like, otherwise, it's me walking around there, and there I am, and it's all falling apart around me, and I'm having all these feelings, what to do with it? So it's finally this camera there which is going to catch it and be there for me, or allow me to feel.
Sort of like a therapy session then.
Yeah, I know. I don't dare, when I apply for money, I don't dare saying it's all therapy, because they say go to therapists then, which I'm completely right about. I go to therapy as well, but I really do see this all generally, not even only if you're from a war. It allows you, man, imagine having this kind of job that allows you to express yourself through something what you're doing. It is always a therapy, even if you make it about someone else. I believe that it's very morally, if you want, the ultimate moral responsibility, and allow yourself, if you make film about yourself, so you really allow yourself to go as far as you want.
But you also make yourself vulnerable, of course, because it is you and only you in that movie, and it's a story about you, and in this film especially, we don't want to spoil anything, but it gets really personal, especially towards the end. So I wonder, to what extent do you open up? Is there always a layer that you don't want to show on camera?
I think that is finally the amazing thing about getting older and learning more about the film, is that I really allow myself, I dare to open as much. I really don't have a feeling, maybe in 10 years I'm going to find out, like, oh, I did hide something. But at this very point, I feel this film especially allowed me to really completely open myself and to kind of get naked on a crossroads, like, that's me. What can I do?
Is that what you mean when in the film you're saying you're trying to make the most honest film you can make?
Yeah, because I do feel that ever since the war started, I have been trying to do that. But I didn't realize that I wasn't honest to myself. And by making films about myself and about this war, I was starting to question the narratives I kept on repeating. That's what we do in life. Kind of you tell a story, especially when you have such intense life, kind of who are you and what you're doing, and then you kind of develop the whole narrative about yourself that you kind of keep on repeating, and when you repeat it often enough, it becomes true. And then at a certain point, when you keep on making films, you really have to scratch, and you have to question certain things, because then it's for the film. So, and then I think this is my third ego documentary, and I think I really am finding finally that path to as deep as I possibly can get at this very moment.
you're looking at your own narrative then and you're changing it. But is that also a little bit to get back to your work as a journalist, to change the whole narrative about a conflict? Because you're confronting people in the film and you're confronting different narratives about the conflict. Is that your revenge a little bit to mass media?
I certainly do hope it's not revenge. It could be. I hope it's not revenge, because then it's not going to last. Then it's kind of this very negative thing that it's going to turn into something nasty sooner or later. But it definitely, me having been journalist, have conditioned me a certain way. It made me who I am, for good and for bad. It has made me more cynical and more doubtful and more maybe suspicious of things, and definitely also more desperate to try to tell people, just please look at the other side. It can't be only one side. And now that's exactly what I tell to my son, when I tell him a story about a wolf and a goat, in a story, wolf eats the goat and he's the nasty guy, and then the mother goat comes and tears him apart, takes goats out and puts stones in the back and throws him in a well. But let's try the story from Wolf's point of view. You know what Wolf did? He left his little wolves at home. And wolves eat meat, and you eat meat too, to tell my son. It's like, and he promised his kids he's going to bring some meat home.
Yeah,
I know my son is also going to go to therapy when he gets 30, but voila.
But I think perhaps the problem today is that many people don't even look at either side anymore. They're just not interested. And I think that's one of the most remarkable scenes in your film is when your first day in the Netherlands, you arrive during the Queen's birthday celebrations, and you're saying, you're sort of talking to the camera and you're saying, how can they celebrate while there's a conflict, a war going on just 2 hours away from here? And I think that sort of reflects what's happening today, because there's masses of refugees coming. There's a crisis in Syria. There's a crisis in the Ukraine. But people seem to not really care until they feel it perhaps in their wallet or in front of their eyes, in their street, in their houses, in their homes. Is that the perception you have as well?
You know what is actually, when I, some years ago, and maybe 20 years ago, I was feeling very strongly about that as well. And a feeling like, how is it possible that we don't care about the world? And I thought only if we're upset about the world, then we do care about it. And now I actually am not sure about this anymore. I'm wondering if that being upset about it is any productive, is actually, what is the real thing to do? What is the really productive way of doing things? It's not only if you're kind of getting your hairs off and screaming at the world. Are you productive? Is anything good going to come out of that? It's what is the right way. You cannot stop living. You cannot expect from people to stop living, because they won't. You can expect, I think, and you can demand from people to start thinking and not allowing themselves to think that they deserve such a good life as we do here, is that we're sitting here so neatly and politely and not killing each other. It's actually luxury. And that is something that we really have to be kind of aware of, but that we have to suffer as much as people in war suffer. We can't expect that from people. It's not possible, and it's not productive either. So it's something in between, I have a feeling.
Is that something you're trying to achieve with your film?
I'm trying to give people kind of right to allow themselves to be vulnerable, to feel their own pain. Because you can't say that Germans don't have their own pain because they're not in a war. It's not true and it's not fair. And you're not going to get them to do anything productive if you want them to suddenly feel like they're in a war. They're not in a war. And that there is a thing like that these people who are walking around here, they all have their own stories. They're not just kind of idiots who kind of decided to leave their home and to eat your own bread. So it's something in between. It's neither that you don't have a right for your own pain, nor that there are these people who just came there to make your life miserable. It's very hard to flee. It's very hard to do all of that. So it's somehow just to open your eyes, just to see that other person. That's really my goal. Just please look at these people. They all have their own story, and you have your own story that kind of idea.
Yeah, but I think the important thing is to strike the balance, right? Because of course we all have our own problems and we all have our right to be emotionally affected by the problems we have in our homes. But at the same time, we have to build up solidarity. We have to welcome all these refugees that are coming with open arms. So I think to strike the balance is maybe perhaps a hard thing.
That is the hardest thing, because you're actually trying to appeal to the masses, and then to appeal to the masses you can only do it in a very superficial and very low threshold way, and that is really tricky. So you want to explain something very subtle in a very simple way. I really wouldn't know how. So it is really very, very difficult, because you can only appeal almost on the individual level, and that's why I somehow believe in these small film personal stories, because I'm gonna get myself naked and vulnerable, and I hope that through that to reach someone, to get them to feel for me, and therefore to feel for all the other people. But that idea that you say that we have to, that's not gonna. My problem is that we're not working on the right way. We cannot expect people, because they're not gonna do it. Yes, we can expect. Of course, in ideal world, that's gonna happen, and we live now so well that we expect the world to be ideal. But is it really ideal? Are people really welcoming to the refugees? Are they more welcoming to the refugees? You know, are the guilt feeling going to make them feel better, or is going to make them even more just close their eyes and just turn around and not want to look at it? We don't want them to do that either. We want them just to see them as a people, and then try to see it. Try to see them, that they exist, and that's really what's going on.
I think your film strikes the perfect balance. It's personal, it's very touching, but it also changes our narrative and our the way we look at a conflict that is in the past but still affects the present. In that way, I hope that many people will go and watch it at the film festival. Thank you very much.
Then
Lidija.
I made it. Yeah. Thank you very much, Lou.